As you know, this is NAFIS's 40 years of being in existence. Think about that. It's almost as old as I am now. So 40 years, and of that, we've had a special person for the last 25 years that's been the leader, who has been the man that we have turned to, who has taken us through good times and some bad times. And we know that this individual can do it again. Many of you call him the father of Impact Aid. I have never thought that. Father, I come from a Catholic background. Father John is not probably something I would have thought of. In my terminology, it's more the Godfather. And I think that fits him a little, I think that fits him a little better. But without any further ado, our executive director, our leader, Mr. John Forkenbrock. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you, Terry. When we were putting together the format for this conference early on, knowing it's the 40 years, and also knowing that we were facing, I could consider a challenge much different than what we've had before, I thought about how would be the best way to approach this. Now, since I've been with NAFIS, I could there's been 4 different times where we've had a major challenge that we were able to address and able to come out victorious. One was just simply the reauthorization in 1994, which comes out after the debacle that happened in 1988. Then there was the Clinton administration's first round where he tried to cut the Bs and federal properties, and we responded to that very effectively. Then there was a 1994 contract with America after the Republicans took over control of Congress, and we had to form the House and Senate coalitions in order to keep the program sustained. And then finally, it was the 2002-2003 period where Bush was trying to eliminate all the Bs again, and on Section 2, and we were able to survive that. Each time we had a plan, and each time we were able to gather the troops, and we were able to win, if you will, for lack of a better word. But we're facing something now that I find to be much different than any of those 4 that I've faced, plus the ones that were before that. That we're really going to require the work of all of you. I think maybe in all the years I've been here, which have been 25, this conference is the most important conference that we've had. Now, the first thing I'm going to do to kind of set the stage is I'm going to show you a video. It's a video that we've kind of put together. It's an old one that we did back in 1998. We've edited it and added a few things to it to kind of give you a flavor of what the challenges were we have faced over those 40 years. Before I do that, however, I want everybody to stand up a second. Would you all stand, please? I know that's you've sat down for a little bit, but let's all stand. I think I've done this once before. Okay, now, this is no disrespect for those who begin to sit down, okay, so don't worry about that. How many of you that are in this room right now were here in 2002? Those of you who were here in 2002 remain standing. Everybody else sit down. Okay, it's not bad. Over half of you sat down, okay. How many of you here were here in 1995? Please continue to stand. Okay, that's good. How many of you were here in 1988? Please continue to stand. Okay. How many of you here in 1982? Please continue to stand. All right, finally, how many of you here were in 1975? We've got 1 person, there's 2 people. Okay, now reason I brought that up is because I think for you to understand NAFIS's importance to the program, you have to understand the community. And you're going to hear this said over and over again this morning in different ways, is that the only reason Impact Aid is alive and well today is because of the community. NAFIS is unlike other organizations such as ASA, which many of you belong, or school boards, or NEA, or AFT, whatever they might be, because all those organizations which we support, and they support us, are all involved with various programs. It's not just one program, it's a variety of programs. Whereas NAFIS and you are concerned about one program only in terms of its major importance to you, and that's Impact Aid. So as a community, you are what makes this thing stick around. You're what keeps it. If you were gone, we would be gone, is what it amounts to. So what I want to do now is I want to show you a video that we've edited. It's not the best quality, but it gets the point across, is how we have met those challenges over the last 40 years. I'm going to ask if you kind of turn the lights down when we do this because it's a little grainy, and it'd probably be better to see if we have darken the room a little bit. Following that, they've all put their canes aside, but I'm going to bring up 9 individuals, all of which have been involved with this program from the very beginning, including its very first executive director, Jim Mesa, who was gracious enough to come down from up in the Philadelphia area yesterday afternoon to be with us, to kind of give you some of the old-time stories. There are plenty of stories, but the bottom line is the only reason, once again, that we're still here today is because of you. It's not because of me, not because of my predecessors, it's because of the people that were involved in the program. School superintendents, administrators, school board members, communities, that's why we're still here today. So with that, Paul, let's start the video, and I guess it's about 13 or 14 minutes long. It might be a little long, but I really wanted you to get a flavor of what we've had to do over the years to keep this program alive.
The National Association of Federally Impacted Schools has protected the federal education program Impact Aid. Through reauthorizations by Congress, the Nixon years, the Reagan Revolution, and the recent Contract with America, NAFIS has tackled threats to the Impact Aid program head-on. Unlike other education associations that oversee a variety of programs, NAFIS's link to Impact Aid is as unique as the program itself. During the 1940s, many Americans realized that the challenges associated with our military forces returning from Europe extended beyond housing and industry and jobs. The challenges included elementary and secondary education. Impact, the impact of educational needs and dollars, was so real that President Truman signed into law Impact Aid, the federal government's commitment that remains the foundation for Impact Aid today. In the beginning, Impact Aid centered on school districts affected by federal property and the children of the military and defense community. By 1953, children living on federal Indian trust land were included, and by 1970, the children of residents of subsidized low-rent housing projects were also recognized as those that could benefit from Impact Aid. To ensure Congress funded Impact Aid, school administrators formed the early NAFIS organization called the Impacted Area Schools Information Service in 1973.
It was no longer just Impact Aid going for the federal dollar. In the early days, we were funded at 100%. And if we didn't get 100% on the supplemental appropriations bill, they would come in with an addition to bring us back to 100% of entitlements. It became necessary because, frankly, there was competition for the education dollar. With the passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, there are other places to put federal education dollars.
A call for reduction in federal spending, symbolized by Ronald Reagan's landslide presidential victory, threatened all that Impact Aid stood for. Once again, NAFIS issued the call to action, and its friends on Capitol Hill answered. The program somehow rode out its adversities of the early 80s, including a massive funding cut and a 3-year phase-out of Category B kids, which are off-base children, low-rent housing, and civilian students. But with the help of Senator James Abnor, a Republican from South Dakota, and some crafty parliamentary moves on the Senate floor, these children were once again eligible for funding. It is during the 1988 reauthorization that NAFIS saw its darkest hour. A divided Impact Aid community twisted and turned, amending and deleting a reauthorization position paper on at least 5 different occasions. The major items of contention were the funding distribution formula and the percentage of entitlement for Category B students. The 1988 reauthorization, created by the politics of the Impact Aid constituency, seemed destined never to work as it was envisioned. The polarized Impact Aid community did not escape the notice of congressional leaders. Representative William Ford, a Democrat from Michigan and ranking member of the House Education and Labor Committee, was so infuriated by NAFIS's handling of Impact Aid during the 1988 reauthorization, he made the following comments on the House floor in May of 1987.
I have worked on the Impact Aid program for now, this is the 23rd year. I've been a consistent supporter all those years, but I have never seen an education lobby that has done such a successful job of creating confusion as this one has. But as an association, the wheels have come off their buggy, and it's about some time somebody told them that.
After the 1988 reauthorization, NAFIS tried to recoup its losses and worked hard to make itself once again a credible spokesperson for impact aid, not only before Congress, but also within its own ranks. NAFIS recognized that it could not afford to be divided among student category lines. The impact aid program was too small, and there were too many people who would like to see impact aid's resources be directed to other education programs. The 1992 election of President Clinton confirmed that the federal deficit was a national concern and that a balanced budget would have to be a priority of the Clinton administration. The Department of Education continued to fight for a bigger piece of the federal budget. But throughout the period, impact aid continued to have funding problems. Category B funding for off-base students was once again set for elimination, as was Section 2 of the program, which provides money for federal property districts. But impact aid, through the NAFIS membership, continued to find support on Capitol Hill. More than 70 members of Congress testified in May of 1992 before Chairman Natcher's Appropriations Subcommittee in the House. As the reauthorization of 1994 approached, NAFIS was given a mandate to reform the impact aid program and unify the community. The reauthorization proposal developed by NAFIS was endorsed by 90% of the membership. The plan eventually prevailed through Congress and is in place today. The election of 1994 brought new leadership to the House and Senate. How the new members of Congress would view impact aid was open for speculation. But in January of 1995, a Nebraska newspaper broke a story that cleared up any delusions while sounding the wake-up alarm for the impact aid community. John Kasich, the new chairman of the House Budget Committee, told a House member that impact aid, quote, was gone, end quote. Clearly, there was a need to organize a grassroots campaign to convey impact aid's purpose and importance to leaders on Capitol Hill. The NAFIS membership was called to action and responded to that call like no other time in the association's history. School district officials organized press conferences and town hall meetings. They sent press releases about the proposed impact aid cuts to newspapers and television stations. NAFIS mobilized its membership to teach their own communities about impact aid and to educate their members of Congress about the program in a unified manner. The results of this grassroots campaign was astounding. Legislators were barraged with press clippings and mail. NAFIS members visited their representatives' offices to insist that impact aid be spared from the proposed cuts. And congressional members who supported the impact aid effort did what they could to influence their colleagues. Members of Congress voiced their support for the impact aid program at a press conference organized by Congressman Chet Edwards and Senator Tim Johnson in March of 1995. The press conference was the beginning of another powerful tool for the impact aid program, the House Impact Aid Coalition.
The Impact Aid Coalition came to life in 1995 at a time when impact aid itself was threatened with political death. Congressman Jim Saxton of New Jersey and I came together feeling that we needed a strong bipartisan effort in the House to defend this important program to help educate Native American children as well as military children. I think the coalition working with NAFIS has done a tremendous job in increasing funding for this important program, despite the fact that most discretionary programs in the federal budget have been cut dramatically.
Today, the House Impact Aid Coalition has grown steadily since those original members from 11 different states spoke at the press conference. The coalition now boasts 116 members, and the Senate coalition is 46 members strong. Together, they represent a strong, bipartisan congressional voice for impact aid. As NAFIS and the impact aid community prepare for the upcoming reauthorization, we must work together to ensure that we do what is right for all impact aid school districts and ultimately the children they serve. We must learn from the past.
After successfully meeting the challenges of the mid-1990s, NAFIS was once again faced with program cuts proposed by the Bush administration in 2001-2002.
The children of U.S. servicemen and women in the Gulf and around the world face an additional challenge and burden at home. The schools they attend could lose millions of dollars in federal funding. Casey Wyan has the report tonight from Coronado, California.
More than 1,000 of Coronado School District's 2,800 students have parents in the military. The small resort town near San Diego is home to 2 naval bases. Many local parents are shipping out to the Persian Gulf. Some of their children now take lunch breaks in Deployment Club, talking with others in the same boat. Administrators here and in similar communities nationwide are angry about a White House proposal to cut $172 million from a program that eases the financial burden on school districts with big military populations.
I know that the federal government is struggling with their budget as well, but I question the timing. Why penalize the children of the very people who are serving our country?
The 50-year-old federal impact aid program compensates school districts for the fact that they don't receive property tax revenue for families who live or work on military bases, but still must educate their children.
So I want you to check your math again.
The White House wants to end payments to schools for families living in taxable off-base residences. For Coronado, the $200,000 cut would mean layoffs at a time when some students need extra help, such as counseling.
It's going to affect their ability to be able to serve some of these children's basic needs as well as special needs regarding the military child.
The potential loss of federal impact aid would be another blow to a school district already facing $900,000 in spending cuts because of the state's budget crisis. School district officials say they're worried that projects like the expansion of this high school are now in jeopardy. The White House says the cuts would be more than offset by nearly $3 billion in proposed increases for other school programs, adding that previous administrations requested similar cuts.
This Impact Aid B proposal was asked for each and every year from 1966 to the year 2001 by every president from Johnson through the Clinton administration.
Districts like Coronado are counting on Congress to restore the funds, which it has done often in the past. Casey Wyan, CNN, Coronado, California.
We're going to take a closer look tonight at why many people with family in the military are upset with the Bush administration. The administration is sending thousands of men and women overseas to a possible war, and at the same time, the president says he wants to cut back on funding for the schools which many of their children attend. ABC's Jackie Judd reports tonight that a lot of military families say the cuts are unjustified.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
from Virginia Beach, Virginia, to San Diego, California, where classrooms are filled with the children of soldiers, parents and administrators are furious with the president.
Kind of shake your head and go, why would he do that?
Especially now with the possibility of war.
Most of these children have enough turmoil in their lives. Their parents are gone. They're deployed. They move from base to base. And the one thing that they have that's secure is the school system. And they really depend on the programs that are given to them.
Since Harry Truman and the Korean War, school districts that educate large numbers of military children have received extra money from Washington.
The idea is to make up lost revenue in those districts. Many in the military don't pay certain taxes, including property taxes, which are used to support the public schools.
Why do we do the telephone activity?
Under the president's plan, Virginia Beach would lose $7 million. San Diego, $4 million.
I mean, that equates to a number of teacher salaries. It may increase the class size. It may be that there's a counselor missing for a military child.
The administration calls this a minor cut from a president who wants to increase overall education spending.
So he is all about for spending more money, but we need to spend it more wisely, and that's what this proposal is all about.
Mr. Bush is not the first president to try to scale back this program, but his unique timing puzzles the critics.
it's just bad public policy to have a crisis and then turn around and take the people that you're using in the crisis and saying, well, we don't care about your kids, so we're going to take away some money.
So as parents are deployed, the people who teach their children have a battle of their own to fight. Jackie Judd, ABC News, Arlington, Virginia.
We must learn from the past, but at the same time draw upon the rich history of the association.
The amazing thing to me about Impact Aid was the degree of fellowship that it engendered over the years, and how many of the early members that I knew served for a long time. Many of these people were with us for 10 or 20 years, maybe longer than we should have been. But they were working very hard, and they came back at great personal expense, and really, they had a good time in the best kind of way, because they were working on something they believed in. They were serving their communities and their students. And Impact Aid, despite what is heard in Washington, is popular and was something that you felt good about doing for your students.
It is clear that Impact Aid, this relatively small program that never seems to find an advocate in the White House, that the leaders of the Department of Education treat as a forgotten stepchild, that only seems to be funded each year through the support of our friends on Capitol Hill. This program will not go quietly. When the chips are down, the NAFIS family works together for the success and longevity of the program. NAFIS is strong because its membership understands the importance of the Impact Aid program. They know that without Impact Aid, teachers would be let go, schools would be shut down, and classes would be cut, and ultimately, the students would suffer. In 1973, NAFIS was formed because school administrators knew that the Impact Aid program would not survive without a watchdog organization. The program's success is still dependent on the association. NAFIS is not some nameless, faceless Washington entity. It is school board members and administrators, teachers and students, and communities. NAFIS is those of you who recognize that the federal government has a responsibility to impact aid school districts. NAFIS is you.
I'll introduce each of these once they get up here, okay? Now, the idea here, again, is to kind of be nostalgic, kind of go back in time and cover these years that are referenced in the video to give you a flavor of how we were able to address some of these problems and some of these challenges. And again, nobody's, I'm sure, appreciate the wheelchairs and canes being left alone. That's good. Everybody's doing well. Pick a seat. I'm not sure how you want to do this. Whatever works best for you guys. Okay, I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to sit over here on the side, but let me introduce who these folks are so you know who they are. We're going to go from my left or my right to this way, I guess it is. This is Tom Madden. Tom is not old necessarily in the sense that he's been around for a while. He was with the Federal Property District, so he was from Lamont Township High School in Illinois. And Tom serves right now as the 802 kind of executive directors, but Tom was around during the early 90s as well as all the way through up until just a few years ago. But next to Tom, to his left, is the old guy, not on the old guy in terms of age, but this is Jim Meza. Jim was the, first of all, I think anybody that would take the job of being the first executive director deserves a hand. So give this guy a hand. He'll have plenty to say as we get this, as we roll through that. Next to Jim is Harold Ott. Harold was a superintendent of two different schools, actually. Started out at Wapato, which was in Washington, the Yakima Reservation. Then he ended up at Lapway over in Wyoming. So, Idaho, excuse me. And Harold was back in the late 80s, I guess, right, when you first came on board, and he was a member of the board for a number of years as well. Okay. Everybody might know this guy, Tom Devlin. Tom was at the Fort Leavenworth school system in Kansas, which was a coterminous district, and was very involved in the formation of MESA, which he'll address a little bit later in 1986. Tom was on the board for a number of years and now is living happily in heaven, i.e. Florida, along the Gulf Coast. And he plays golf and boats most of the time. I don't think he does anything else. I'll move over here. Right in the middle, and the little chair is Wayne Lett. Wayne is at Newport News, where when he was at. He was actually at York County for a while, went to Newport News. He served with Don Bruno. Some of you may remember Don. Those of you who are old, actually, Don was on the personnel committee when I got hired. In fact, Don Bruno and Dave Kincaid are the two you can actually shoot at for hiring me, because if they weren't around, I probably would be doing something else right now. But anyways, Wayne was on the board. He was president of NAFIS for a couple of years back in, what, 1990, thereabouts, something like that? Okay, 99, 2000, that period of time. So again, he goes clear back to the late 80s as well. Next to him is Dave Kincaid. Dave is really the older one up here. He was actually, as I said earlier, he was president when I was hired. In fact, he was president when the organization went through kind of a re-incorporation, if you will. He served for 3 years. Most of the NAFIS presidents were always for 2, except Dave Fish, who was on it forever. In fact, Dave, who unfortunately this past January just passed away, is really kind of the guy that kept this organization together in the early 70s, and Jim can probably address that a little bit. You'll notice on the screen, he was actually president for like 4 years. I think he actually had a couple of other years as well. But Dave Fish was one of the key guys that kept this organization going in the beginning, and Dave Kincaid worked a lot with Dave. Dave was from Florida, or California rather, at the Atlanta School District that served the George Air Force Base, which ultimately closed down. Next to them is Fern Lapidus. If you can see her there sitting down, little Fern, you should be in the high chair actually. Fern is still involved with Impact Aid. She was actually with the New York City schools and was very instrumental in bringing the low-rent housing kids into the program back in the 70s. Fern is the one that does go back clearly to the early 70s and is still involved with the program now, working with one of our districts in California on a federal property issue. But Fern has a lot of stories to tell and a lot of history behind her. Next to Fern is Barry Beecham. Barry was our past president a couple years ago from Lawton, Oklahoma, at Fort Sill. And Barry goes back a number of years too, back in the late 80s when he first got involved. Lawton has always been one of the school systems that played a key role with Impact Aid. You may remember Ed Hennessy, some of you, who served as president of NAFIS back in the 80s and was superintendent for a number of years. In fact, I think you served as his business manager during the time he was there. And then the old lady on the hill up here is Max Schackemeyer. If anybody has, Max and I go back a long, long way. In fact, before I was living at NAFIS, Max and I would have liaisons at different spots around the country. In any case, we'd always try to find somebody with 12 letters in their name, because I have 11 and she has 13. So we're always looking around for the person with 12 letters in their last name so we could have something in common with somebody else. But Max formerly worked with the South Dakota Department of Education, was very involved in South Dakota Impact Aid, and goes clear back to the early 70s as well, and now actually works as a consultant in South Dakota for the South Dakota Impact Aid School Association, but very knowledgeable about the program. So these are the people that we've got up here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back down, and we're going to kind of start with the early 70s. I'll probably start with Jim and Fern, and this is kind of like a parlor room discussion. I told everybody that I'm not sure how this is going to work. I'm not too concerned about timing, because I want to make sure that they convey to you how they, as leadership during that time or involved in that time, how we were able to rally the troops. Much like what's said in that video, NAFIS is you. And each time we've had these different challenges, the you in NAFIS came forward to make the program work, to allow it to survive. And that's what we're faced right now today. We are faced with a survival issue in terms of funding. So when we get all through with this afternoon, we'll kind of look at what our strategies might be as we deal with Tuesday. But for the time being, let's kind of talk about the old times. So Jim, let me kind of just pick it up with you, if you wouldn't mind, and kind of talk about how we got started and just share your thoughts about some of the challenges you faced as the early executive director.
Well, thank you, and I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank John for his courtesies to me and also for the tremendous work he has done since I left what we thought was a temporary job. But just like as your trips to Washington sometimes seem unnecessary, I want to sum up everything I can say that may have value in one sentence. Impact Aid is here because you're here today. And that has to be the theme that's going on since the Second World War, which I wasn't part of, but I did work with the fellows and the few women who came to Washington after the military buildup. At the time of the military buildup, the schools were hit with thousands of children being dislocated all over America, and no one knew what to do, but Congress did. And they would pass bills in the Appropriations Committee, school district by school district, to build a building or to pay for a teacher or to deal with the dependent families translocated by war. And as was said in the video, the Korean War comes and there was a need to establish a national program, And before there was a Department of Education, they put together on Capitol Hill an impact aid program. Our responsibilities to peoples who live on Indian trust lands and Native Americans gave rise to that entitlement, as did the public housing. But again, you're here because the children are back home, and they're real, and they're there, and need to be educated year after year. Dave Fish brought to mind, something that I think needs stressing, and then I'll pass the mic to someone else, because the reason the program looks like the program does is the variations and the differences between all of you. And if you look left and you look right, one of the amazing things about this association is its diversity in terms of how schools are financed, organized, what your communities look like. But you're here for one simple fact, that the federal government has a responsibility to the children who live in your districts and the communities that they come from when they bring into that community military bases which support all of us, housing projects which help all of us, and our responsibilities to Native Americans. And being creatures of state and local governments, the realities of school finance being diverse lead to programs that look like impact aid. One of the reasons I think impact aid survived in part was no one completely understands it. It has so many tiers, so many formulas. I used to tell people when they didn't understand what I was saying, I'm not sure, but it might be a logarithm. And not knowing what a logarithm even was, that usually passed, at least in the halls of Congress, as good advice. But I want to just stress, emphasize, and repeat that without your participation, there won't be a program. And the other theme I want to just say before I pass the mic was, we all know the story about Ben Franklin. When I asked him about in Philadelphia what kind of a government we had, he said it's a republic if you can keep it. I think the same thing works here. The reason you're also here, as we were talking at lunch, always in response to an emergency, always in response to a new proposal, is the Constitution requires Congress to pass a budget each year. Therefore, there has to be hearings each year. And remember, if you think this is confusing, remember the people who write our laws are a committee of 535 people, all with different ideas. So at the end of the day, the resulting legislation is probably something that no one really wants, but for year after year after year, because of your children and because of the needs of America, this is a problem we've got to have. But before I pass, I'll say again, it'll be a program as long as you keep it, and right or wrong, that program requires you as educators to talk to that committee of 535 on an annual basis in order to remind them that this is a responsibility that the government created, the impacts on your community, and it's for the children.
One of the things that got NAFIS started in the first place, obviously, was a point that Dave mentioned in the video, is that competition for dollars. Impact aid was never a problem in terms of dollars all the way through even the late 60s, but with the passage of the ESCA in 65, there became a competition for dollars. We came up with this idea of how do we expand our political base, and then the idea of tiers and all these different ways in which to address the funding needs of different schools. Fern and some of the rest of you want to address some of those issues that went on in the 70s as to how the organization basically kind of dealt with the issue of trying to compete for money and how to keep the organization together as far as the need for dollars based on different districts' needs and so forth?
In 1974, in the reauthorization of the Education Amendments, Title I, and the rest of the programs, impact aid was in that reauthorization. Included in there was low-end public housing, were defined as federally connected children. The intent was to broaden the base of the program. Low-rent public housing was built in order to ensure that the federal government once again had a role to provide housing for those children that needed it. Putting it in impact aid allowed many of these children to now be eligible. Expanding the definition meant bringing in many of the large cities, many areas in the South. It also vastly increased the number of programs and children that now qualified for impact aid. New York City at that time had 130,000 low-rent public housing children. Having brought them into the program created another problem on how are we going to fund them. Congress at that time, which is very different from now, was still coming off the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This wanted, the intent here in Congress was to provide access and equity for all children. Now, all of a sudden, by 1974, you had lots and lots of federal money going into education programs. It was very different because Congress wanted to put money into federal education programs. They didn't want to cut the program. However, in terms of impact aid, all of a sudden there were a huge number of children that were now eligible that hadn't been eligible previously. I got involved when Dave Fish, whom I knew from the Council of Great City Schools, told me all about this organization headed up by Jim. Come and join them. At that time, New York City had 5 members of the Education Committee in the House and the ranking minority member of the Education Committee in the Senate. Dave wasn't stupid. He knew where his next reauthorization was coming from, and I was suddenly very welcome in the group. As time went on, there were more problems in how to organize the different groups within the program. And they appointed, at the end of the Carter administration, they appointed a commission to review the impact aid program. Included in that commission were very selected members from each group from around the country. My former boss was on there from New York City. One of the advantages that the commission had was to travel around the country and look at other programs, look at Indian lands, look at military installations. It was a marvelous experience because, as Dave pointed out, impact aid was one family, and we worked as one family. Did we disagree? Yes, absolutely. But we basically liked each other. We spent a lot of time together, and you know, if there ever is an argument in the program, by all means go next door and meet the impact aid district up the street from you. It's a marvelous education. The commission did a terrific job. They did get a report together on how to distribute the funds and how to mesh each section of the program. Unfortunately, Carter left office, and the report is somewhere. I have no idea where.
I think I have one in my drawer someplace in the office, but it's got very dusty, actually. I was going to, you know, Josh, if you go back to the slide just before the one with the commission on it, the one just before that, one of the things I was going to ask Jim about, I really enjoyed, in a funny sort of way, whoever wrote the newsletter. Because it's clear that in those days, we didn't have an issue of Title IX. That was not around, okay? So I'm looking at a little piece up here that came out of a 78 newsletter where, I don't recall who wrote it, but it said, every man possible is needed in Washington next Tuesday, July 11th, to work on Mr. Perkins's H.R. 15 bill. They tell me that the Proposition 13 shook the rafters and we are in extreme danger. Impact aid superintendents are the only ones who can pass the bill. Who wrote that?
That sounds like cross-examination. I won't plead guilty to that, but I will merely reflect at the time and the culture that we were dealing with senators and congressmen who had been in Congress since the 30s. And in the House of Representatives, there was no ladies' room anywhere in the Capitol till some of the New York congresswomen came down and demanded one. So yes, life has changed as the newsletter changed, but that was written, there was a fellow named Paul Henry from Montgomery County Public Schools who would come down each time a newsletter went out and paste on the labels because he was worried that we were wasting labels. We were allotted, before the electronic media, certain numbers of stamps and other kinds of things. And truthfully, the organization was an information service funded by newsletter subscriptions. I would think they were glad to see you. But the biggest fight was the subscription was based on the number of students you had in the school district, right, Dave? Not how many newsletters you got. So you could get one for $200 or you could get one for $5,000, depending on the number of students. But it was an information service. And going back and seeing the picture of Congressman Ford, it was really so often driven, and that's where on the commission, Charlie Aikens from Kentucky, whose predecessor was Gil Burkhead, who ran one-room schoolhouses, working with John Sparkman, then Mississippi fellows. I mean, and had no office. It would gather at the Congressional Hotel, which has still been knocked down, where the school administrators would meet at the call of the chair and put out a newsletter in whatever fashion possible.
Okay, moving on, I think now to the next round, which would be kind of get us into the 80s. We know that as I said before, the commission report never went very far. In 81, we actually saw the name change to NAFIS from what was originally called that educational service or whatever it was called. A March 5th newsletter is printed up on there now, which talks a little bit about the idea that we're having a issue now with the Reagan administration. Actually, the first one was at the end of the Carter administration, because the Carter budget that was being submitted for 1980 was calling again for cuts to some extent, which again I find rather ironic because the commission report had not yet even been submitted at the time. But in any case, Dave Fish, whose name is on that particular one that you're looking up on the screen on, was sending out an email, or not an email, a newsletter to everyone talking about the fact that Category B students was going to be nailed once again, or actually, really, this is probably one of the first times that B students were really going after. And so he makes that comment. Little did he know that the next year, once Reagan became president, that the program would be really under attack. Does anybody recall, Fern, Dave, Max, Jim as well to some extent, do you remember the Reagan administration's attempt in the beginning? They were trying to, if I always recall the election of 1980, because I was actually at that time, I served in the Carter administration. I always tell kids I teach a class to sometimes out here in D.C., I'll say I worked for President Carter for about 2.5 years, but nobody remembers who President Carter was. All they think of as Habitat for Humanity. That's kind of what he's known for. But in any case, I recall that when Reagan won in 1980, he won based on the idea, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? That was his campaign, which of course we were not, because we were at double-digit inflation, we were in an energy crisis, a variety of other things. But Reagan came in saying he was going to do a number of things, one of which was he was going to reduce the debt, he was going to balance the budget, and he was going to win the war, if you will, against the Soviet Union. You know, he's going to do all those things, but while at the same time he's going to reduce the deficit. Well, the only way he could do that, of course, was to go after programs that he didn't feel were necessary. So he block granted. Remember, went to the block grants. And as a result of that, impact aid was going to get nailed. 3 years, all Bs would be funded or would be phased out, and he cut the program by about $200 million in the first year. You want to comment on some of the things that went on during that time period in terms of what NAFIS tried to do or did to try to respond to that? Anybody can take on. Wayne?
Back in 1982, the York County School Board passed a resolution saying that they were going to issue tuition bills to all of the military parents in the district if funding didn't arrive in the following school year. And they put a deadline of November of 1982. Well, what happened, of course, is the funding didn't arrive for our school district because of delays in providing the funding, as well as some of the disputes with the administration. And so we were getting ready to send out the tuition bills, and the Air Force said, don't send them to the parents, just send them to us. Well, we knew what was going to happen. They'd go on the round file if they went right to the Air Force commandant there at the local base. We sent them to the individual parents, and as well as some of the other districts across the nation. And those parents, of course, they called us, and we just referred them to their commander and the Pentagon. And they started making probably hundreds of phone calls because they didn't want to be saddled with a tuition bill, and they didn't want their students to be excluded from school if they didn't pay the tuition bill. And what happened as a result of that was the Air Force ended up sending a Department of Defense liaison down to the York County School Board to try to negotiate with the school board and also to try to reassure the parents. Well, that wasn't going anywhere as far as the York County School Board was concerned. And eventually, thanks to working with our congressman, which is obviously one of the most important factors in what you are continuing to do, they ended up getting a special provision passed so that the school districts across the nation could start receiving their impact aid funds. But that parents, not only then, but now, can be a very important leg in helping to make sure that you receive your impact aid funding and making sure the program remains viable.
You'll notice up on the screen that what he's talking about, there's a little item up there that says NAFIS push for preliminary payments. Senator Jim Exxon, Democrat from Nebraska, is the one that made that happen. We never had preliminary payments up until the time that Wayne's just describing. So it didn't require really legislation per se, but he put language in an appropriations bill that directed the department to make preliminary payments. We've never had that before, but every time after that now, of course, that's just an everyday occurrence, just a question of what they actually pay out in terms of preliminary payment. Fairfax County actually followed that up not too much after York County did. They did the same thing. Dave?
I just wanted to, is this on? Add a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
A comment to that. I started coming back to the Impact Aid conferences when the first president, Dave Fish, was in office. And he was from San Diego, California, being from California after the 1979 when he was no longer president. And the threat of the B cut of the B students, he took me under his wing and he said, Dave, we really need to organize the California impact aid people so that we can, for two reasons. One, we can be more organized on the Hill and make sure that every congressional office from California has someone educating them about the program. And the other concern was that could completely eliminate the impact aid program was that 7 school districts, 7 states were equalized, and the funding for impact aid was going directly to the states rather than the school districts. And his fear was that California would claim that they're equalized, and therefore instead of the impact aid funding coming to the schools, it would go directly to the state. So we met at LAX in 1980, and they agreed that we should have a California Impact Aid Association. And we went back, met a month later, and I wrote the bylaws and the funding structure, the dues, and was elected the first president of that organization. And as a result of that, with the help of NAFIS and the Department of Education, we were able to get printouts for every congressional district, letting them know how much funding they would get. And if there were 12 representatives from California, we gave them the information, and every congressional office was covered. And also, we hired a lobbyist in California to watch the scene and make sure that California didn't declare us an equalized state. The other thing, when I became president in 1988, I had the opportunity to sit on an interview panel, and we hired John Forkenbrock. That was 25 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, this is his silver anniversary as the executive director of NAFIS. Congratulations, John.
Nobody else would hire me, Dave. That's the problem. Oh, thank you very much. All right, what we know then that what happened is that the Reagan administration went through this process of eliminating the Bs over 3 years. He had reduced funding. Most of the funding obviously initially came out of the B pot, but he also capped A payments, and they also basically froze the LCR. So we were in effect, in 1983, 84, 85, we were in a 3-year phase down of the program. So basically the program was really in dire straits. It was actually at a point where it really was looking at expiration, at least the B category. But a guy by the name of Jim Abner from South Dakota came to the rescue, and this is what we're looking for today, basically, somebody coming to the rescue. But I'm going to let Max Schockemeyer, who is from South Dakota, kind of pick up on this, and everybody else can chime in on it, is what happened during that middle 80 period that got Abner going, first of all, and then what happened?
Well, the freeze in the LCR was the beginning at the 1981 level, and then the phase down of the Bs over the 3-year period. South Dakota has approximately half their school districts have B students. However, the majority of the B students, of course, were at Douglas School District, Ellsworth Air Force Base. And with the lack of preliminary payment, the freeze at the 1981 level, and the elimination of the Bs, the Douglas School District was actually looking at closing the doors. It was a reality. and it was immediate reality. And when we were out here during the NAFIS conference, which at that time there were about 90 people that attended, and about 5 women. I mean, we talk about the ad that was pretty limited on calling them in. There were only 5 women that attended the conferences at that time. Well, we had met with Senator Abner, and Barb Magnuson, his staffer, took a great interest in the bee situation, and we discussed the funding levels with her, and she became a very strong advocate with Senator Jim in working to reinstate them and increase funding. And because of the urgency of Douglas School District closing down, they were able to do that. Now, I had worked with Barb probably close to a month before the conference, supplying her with data and information, no idea what it was for. And she showed up with Senator Abner at the conference, and he walked up to the podium and announced that he was restoring $110 million back into impact aid, which was the turning point, really, for the whole program.
Anyone else remember that? Did anyone want to add to what Max said? This pretty much covers it. The only thing that happened...
John, if I can add,
go ahead.
And I think that's the amazing story of impact aid, that there always seems to be a senator or a congressperson who gets it. And I think reflect back on the why question, and I want to go back to that commission the president had. They went all over the country, read a report, and it disappeared. But what never disappears is the constant renewing pattern of the Congress people get it because they understand their communities. They're proud of their schools. They know their children. They know the policy justifications. And the trouble with the White House, be it Democrat, Republican, and the department is, it serves no greater Washington purpose than dealing with the impact caused by other programs. They have no quality control. They don't get to say what goes, very few regulations. But the reason that Congress always seems to find its voice on this is they know their communities, they're proud of their schools, and they don't want them harmed.
That's absolutely right, Jim. The one more thing I want to mention about Abner is that, in addition to what Max described, in 1985, when Congress was putting together the 1986 budget resolution, Senator Dole and Senator Domenici from New Mexico put together language in the budget resolution that once again would zero out impact aid. It would zero it out. But Abner, again, I got to keep in mind, Abner's acting on principle here. He is a Republican on the Appropriations Committee with a Republican majority in the Senate at that time. You had Dole and Domenici, chairman of the Budget Committee, and Dole being the majority leader. And they were pushing to get impact aid zeroed out in the budget. But Abner, once again, took them on. And I love this quote. David Stockman, who was the OMB director under Ronald Reagan, wrote a book after he left the administration, somewhat talking about why Reagan screwed up in terms of the revolution not being successful. It's a book called The Triumph of Politics, basically. But I always love this quote that's in his book. This is right out of Stockman's book, The Triumph of Politics. Quote, "We had killed impact aid in February 1981 in the cutting room, but it had been resurrected repeatedly in the interim until the Dole-Domenici budget abolished it again. Now along came Senator Jim Abner of South Dakota, who stood to lose $300,000 at a single Air Force-based school district out yonder in the Badlands. In the end, his vote went into the yes column, and $100 million in impact aid went back into the budget." So once again, Jim Abner in the 1980s was clearly the savior of this program in a variety of different ways, representing both the military, obviously, and the Indian land districts. Now, the thing about it is that Abner didn't do this by himself. When Abner pulled this off, he was able to get a coalition of other members to support his efforts to keep impact aid alive. And one of those was Senator Moynihan from New York, and Senator Warner from Virginia, John Warner, not Mark Warner, who's currently in there. And they helped resurrect impact aid. But when they began to look at the formula that was there in 1986, 87, they said, hey, look, Senator Abner, we've worked our little buns off to get this program and keep it alive, but we're not getting any money. Our schools, which are relatively low on the impact aid scale in terms of comparison to, say, South Dakota or New Mexico or whatever, we're low on that totem pole. You've got to change the funding formula somehow so our schools get more money, which led to the idea of the Super A's and sub-supers and so forth and so on. But at the same time, the 1988 reauthorization was coming about. So NAFIS then, as an organization, was getting ready to prepare the reauthorization in 1988, knowing full well that there was members of Congress who did not care for the fact that the money was highly going to the highly impacted districts. So that's where NAFIS, as I sometimes call it, had its darkest hour, because they had no idea which way they were going. Now, I'll ask some of the folks up here who may remember that time, if they would like, to comment on what was going on in 1988. Tom Devlin might be the best to do this, because he was heavily involved with the military schools who saw themselves totally disorganized, not themselves, but the organization, if you will.
Prior to that, I'd like to go back to 1986 and just make a quick point here for everybody in the audience, maybe you people that are here for the first time. Bob Dole from Kansas, Republican, majority leader, World War II hero, veteran, you name it. He's going to abolish impact aid, having Fort Leavenworth and Fort Riley there in Kansas. I mean, we're talking about 100% heavily impacted district at Fort Leavenworth and very heavily impacted at Fort Riley. But yet he submitted a bill with Domenici to gut impact aid. Why is that? Because the people in Kansas did a very poor job of communicating the need that impact aid was fulfilling. Kansas is an equalized state. All the money from the federal government going to Kansas, to the state. Fort Leavenworth had the, I think, second or third lowest per pupil expenditure in the entire state of Kansas. And here was our senator, World War II hero. He didn't know any of this, as I said. So the districts in Kansas, the representatives of Kansas, the superintendents, the board members, obviously were not doing their job as you people are doing here today. And that's a point to be taken that's been said around the table. And I applaud, sincerely applaud each and every one of you that are sitting here today. You've given up your weekends, you've given up your family time to come here and to commit to a program and to support a program that is absolutely necessary for the education of Native American children, military children, and so on. And I just applaud you, having sat in your seats for almost 20 years. So, again, my only point on this, go to those offices, have FaceTime, communicate. Don't send an email. I guarantee you, half them won't be read. Letters, nice, you might get a response. Face-to-face time. I went to Washington many, many times each year just to stand in front of that senator or that congressman. The other point of this is the most important person in that office is the staffer. Take care of those staffers. Make them your friends. Get them to trust you. There's a big, big trust factor involved when you walk into an office and you say, I need to have X number of dollars put back into impact aid or so forth. Bob Dole, because the formulation of the MESA group was part of it, and I was very privileged to be invited to Omaha, Nebraska by the Bellevue School District in 1986. I was assistant superintendent at that time. And 17 very heavily impacted military school districts showed up for that meeting because the military, our funding was going away. I mean, we were struggling. As I said, Fort Leavenworth, 2,500 military kids living on the post, and they had the lowest per pupil expenditure in the state, one of them. So we met in Omaha. We began to put together a plan of action that would put our cause in front of all those in Congress and get as much support as we could. And I think we grew over the years to 30-some districts that were involved in MESA when I retired in 2005. And you can see I've adopted to the Florida lifestyle of retirement fairly well. I had 30 suits. I don't own one today. And I can't even find socks. If they're not golf socks, I don't have them. But again, this is really a boots-on-the-ground organization. You're the people that make it work. John Forkenbrock's a great leader, and I've enjoyed following John for a number of years. But he can't do it all. You have got to get in there in those offices. You've got to bang on the table. You've got to be honest with your representatives. Don't make up need. Don't do that. Put the need on the table that you have and continue doing what you're doing. And your attendance here is essential to the success of this program, as has been said.
Thank you, Tom. And Tom certainly is one who worked with staff. I can tell you that for personal experience. He worked with the staff of his delegation probably as well, if not better, than any of our other schools. He knew those people backwards and forwards, knew where they lived, knew how many kids they had, how many kids they didn't have, whatever the case may be. But he was a true champion, if you will, of understanding how to work with staff. Okay, now as we face Harold, go ahead.
I became a rookie superintendent back in the early 80s in Wapato, Washington. And I attended my first conference, I think it was in 1983. And I was immediately impressed with the knowledge of the leaders. Some of them are sitting right up here. Some of you are still out there in the room. And I decided I would look at the people that were most successful and copy them. I looked at California's state organization. I looked at South Dakota's, talked with Glenn Barnes, talked with Dave Fish, and went back to the state of Washington, and we put together what became a really, really strong state organization. And then retired and went to Idaho and did the same thing. There is an education researcher, his name is Michael Fullen, and he says that one of the things that is most important for success in education is moral purpose. And you people have it. Tom spoke of it. I've watched it here for 30-some years. That moral purpose is believing in the importance of educating our young people and placing them at the highest possible value. And you people do that. There's an old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. However, in this organization, it's both. It's what you know from the basics that Barry and others have taught people over the years to what Jim is talking about, the connectivity on the Hill. And that connectivity has to happen all year. It can't be twice a year. It can't be once a year. I can't applaud you enough, as Tom has said, for you to be here. But this is only part of what you do. It's the follow-up letters. It's the face-to-face that you can have. I can remember a situation when I was president of the Washington State Association, and I was at that point in charge of setting up, I think we had like 12 appointments on the Hill. And so I would contact the staffers and try and build a relationship with all of them. And I can remember on one of those trips that we had an appointment at whatever time, 10:30 a.m., and walked into the office, good relationship with the staffer. The staffer says, Congressman, unnamed, not available. And I look through the door, and Congressman, unnamed, is sitting at his desk, it was a he, with his feet up, eating a sandwich. And I can tell you, and some of you know me pretty well, it made me really livid. And I didn't do anything at that point. I learned that if you lose your temper, you lose. But I can tell you, I decided at that time that I needed to build a better relationship with that person. And so I met with him independently. And I told him pretty frankly how upset I was and how rude I thought it was. And I asked him what I had done wrong in setting up my appointment. And he said nothing. And so I said, well then, how come we didn't have the courtesy of meeting? Because I had about 15 people out there to talk with him. And I got an apology. And I can tell you then that we got an invitation to teach a lesson on impact aid to the entire Washington State delegation. and we made a lot of money, really, for our kids through that. So don't give up. Figure out how to make the connections. Some people like data. Some people like stories. Success stories of children in your district, of every ethnic group, military students, the stories that will tug at their heartstrings. Use whatever it takes to get into their head. And if we convince them, we will get their vote. So don't give up. You people do a great job. The last piece I had a young superintendent, a new superintendent, at one of our state meetings in Idaho last week, grab me and say, "Can I talk to you after our meeting?" I said, "Sure." He said, "How important is it that we do anything at the national level with impact aid and NISA?" And I said, "It is paramount. You have to do this. If you don't make those connections, people don't know you care. If they don't understand, they won't support you. So keep doing your work. Thank you for everything."
Just a little bit of a follow-up to what Tom and Harold have said. What we're going through right now with the budget cuts and sequestration is identical to what we experienced in the 80s. It is no different, absolutely no different. The thing is we need to find a Senator Jim, a Senator Chet Edwards, a true leader, and a person that's going to step forward and fight for our cause and get the other ones to come along with him. And the comment that Tom made about the staffers, it is a little bit different with the staffers today. In the 80s, we would have a get-together on Monday night at the conference, and I bet there were close to 50 to 60 staffers that would attend that reception. And we would get the opportunity to tell our stories to other states as well as the staffers to get to know one another and share the experiences. But now with the change in the ethics and things like that, they don't do that. So your time is limited with that staffer now. But somehow try, if you're out here for another reason or a purpose, for another program even, stop in, try and get that 15 to 30 minutes with that staffer to keep your story in front of them and with them. It's really important.
And hopefully our stories have lessons about what we learned. I think this group is great because it's been brutally candid about its weakness, which is also its strength. And at least in the little philosophy I once read about, the Greeks figured out a long time ago, your strengths are your weaknesses, and your weaknesses are your strength. But here, the same strength that comes from diversity is also part of its weakness, that if not carefully balanced, rips us apart. Because particularly in times of stress, it's stress in your school districts, stress in budgets all high and low, it's everybody cuts and runs, everybody grabs what they can. And I respect those of you that belong to just one school district, and those are the children you care about, but the reality within the organization, but also in the Hill is, no school district can do it alone, no senator can do it alone, no congressman can do it alone. And that's why we get these strange formulas, this compromise that comes, and every time it seems the lesson's forgotten, it gets relearned, because the group falls apart. I'm old enough now to remember, I mean, the Native Americans at one point were rightfully asking for their share. Low-end housing, there was, why do we need to be involved with military families? And the answer came back in the Natcher hearings when we all came in there in one of the many crises. And Congressman Natcher says, you know, Jim, I really don't want to hear from a bunch of school superintendents. Why don't you teach their congressmen? Because I'm having to tell them what they should have learned from the school districts on why I need their vote. So he looked at me, he says, here's the test. No more Congress, no more superintendents, no more board members unless they're accompanied by a congressman. We scattered, we ran, we jumped, and at that hearing was the largest concentration of Congress people ever to testify on an education bill. And the school districts wrote the lesson, they taught the lesson, and the Congress people recited. And the bill carried very successfully. But I just want to strike that note, because John was saying that at times where people felt that they couldn't get it in the group, they do it alone, as Congressman Ford said, it about destroyed the program. To me, John, That was the biggest threat. Not from downtown, not from policy people, not from presidential budget cutters, but when the group presented Congress with such confusion that they couldn't assemble the votes.
Yeah, that's right, Jim, absolutely. We were able to resolve that. I went kind of moved things along a little bit. We were able to resolve that through the concept of the Phoenix proposal. Some of you were very much involved in that, where we tried to really, in fact, identify a need element that has been very successful ever since we put it in place in 1995. I want to talk just a minute because I want to move along a little bit. We get into the 1900s with the Clinton administration, and it picks up on what Jim said, because when Clinton first submitted that initial budget down as his own, eliminating the Bs, eliminating federal properties, we needed to do exactly what Natcher did with you, because he told us the same thing. And you noticed on the video, in fact, I think, Harold, I think you see, some of you guys may saw yourself in that video, because I remember, Harold, you're in there, I think, as I recall. But in any case, at one point in time, he asked us to get as many members as we could to testify. And we had 3 days where we brought in 72 House members to speak on behalf of the program and go after the administration proposal to eliminate the program. At about that same time, we did something that it's very, very difficult to do today. Brian kind of checked into it, but we had Richard Bordeaux, who many of you know Richard. He was at Todd County Schools in South Dakota. We brought in students from Todd County, and we organized a rally on the Capitol steps. You saw those signs at the beginning of the video where they're all holding them up. That was in front of the Capitol. I did a rally. We had members speak, and I always remember that God must have been on our side, because at the very time we were talking about the impact on quality of life, etc., for some reason or other, some 2 or 3 F-14s flew over just outside the Capitol. I don't know if they were doing an issue regarding some kind of a threat or what. I'm not sure what it was. And then at the same time, some guys from Fort Myer or whatever were running in front of the Capitol. It was like this is all was kind of orchestrated. But as a result of that, we obviously turned back the threat. Now, Tom, 802, Section 802 has always been on the chopping block. This is one program that the Department of Education, the administration, nobody cares for. But we've been able to hold on to it year after year because of the growth of the 802 districts, from a group of about 3 or 4 when I first started to a very effective group today. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you've organized and how well you've done?
Yes, I will. Thank you, John. My world of impact aid started in 1990. We had our meeting this morning, the Section 802 group, and I mentioned that I've been involved since 1990. And the group was supposed to think, wow, that was a long time, and that was a long time ago. And I was supposed to think, yes, it is a long time, and was a long time ago, until I heard the histories represented by my colleagues up here today. I can't say this very often, but I feel like the youngster of the group. 1990, I was a new superintendent in Illinois, and we were excuse me, eligible for something called impact aid. When I say my world of impact aid, the world was small. It was Section 2 at the time. It was federal properties. That's all I knew. But I did go down to Dallas, and I met with Tom Davenport and 2 other superintendents who were also Section 2 eligible districts. We talked about the program. Tom is the one of the 3 that stepped forward and has been involved ever since. But we came out here for our first NAFIS meeting, a little bit of a chip on our shoulder, and this is going to sound a little bit familiar, and I haven't really shared this even with our Section 802 group, but at the time, we felt that our section, 802, federal properties, was underappreciated, underrepresented, and maybe worst of all, unnoticed. And even to the point, this is going to sound familiar, that we wondered if we needed to create our own organization and break away from NAFIS. We did not do that, and I thank God that we didn't, that we stuck with NAFIS. They listened to our concerns. As a matter of fact, Tom and I were asked to address the NAFIS board, talk about some of the concerns we had, and to the board's credit, they listened. Things started to happen to our benefit as a Section 802 group. John's right. When he started, he's talking 2 or 3. I know that first year I came out, 1990, there were 6 people that attended the Section 2 meeting. Now we have the 2 meetings with NAFIS every year, and we have 2 meetings of our own, regularly attended by 40 to 50 hardworking, dedicated members of Section 802. So it's grown in that way. I was trying to think. We have 3 major programs And I'm trying to think of a metaphor, and thoughts like three blind mice, that didn't seem to work very well. Three coins in a fountain, that didn't work. Then I thought of the Three Musketeers, and before you say, well, that's even a stretch, forget about the Musketeers, think about what their motto was. All for one and one for all. That's what we are. That's what you heard Terry talking about. That's what you've heard from some of the members up here. There have been times, I was a federal properties district. That's all I had. But there were times when the entire program was under fire, and we would make our visits and we would talk about supporting all the programs. That's a one-for-all kind of mindset. As recently as the last Obama budget proposal, where Section 802 was zeroed out, you all came to our aid in an all-for-one effort. That's been our history. That's, as a superintendent, I found my job all-consuming. If I'd been smarter and more organized, maybe it wouldn't have been all-consuming, but I wasn't. So it was. And the one thing I've noticed in the last 20 years, the only opportunity I've had to make friends have been the professional contacts I've made, many of which have been through this organization. I've met some great people. I've made some great friends. I have great pride in the way that as an organization we've all worked for each other. That's been our history, and that has to continue to be our future.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, again, we want to move this along because we could go on this forever. We have the House-Senate coalition formed in the mid-'90s because of the impact of the contract with America. Anybody want to comment a little bit about the formation of the coalitions?
Well, I just want to say that one of the outcomes of NAFIS realizing that we all have to work together in the 80s and 90s after what we went through in the 80s and seeing the group splinter off a little bit when they went to visit their congressman was in the reauthorization. We came together and all of the segments of the Impact Aid community worked on the Phoenix proposal that John mentioned, and that's something that you're going to continue to have to do, because if you don't, individuals are going to pick off individual congressmen and senators. The administration will take those that are opposed to Impact Aid or opposed to certain segments to use that as the reason for Impact Aid not to be funded or to have reduced funding. So I think we really need to stick together as we have done in the recent past, and that's one of the things that the Impact Aid Coalition was the result of. Everybody getting together, contacting their congressman to come together and support the whole Impact Aid program. I think initially there were 70 congressmen that came together to support Impact Aid, and that was immediately followed within months by the Senate Impact Aid Coalition. And those two groups have become a phenomenal success for our organization and our students in working with the rest of Congress and protecting our program and trying to see it furthered.
Well, I have had the privilege of maybe most recently getting to be involved in learning so much from all of these individuals. But if I could just point out a couple of things in summary. One, probably inappropriate, but sometimes it appears Impact Aid is the drama queen of education bills. There's always a crisis. And what we do know, however, is that we always have a Superman when we have a crisis. And that Superman is not the person sitting to the right or the left of you. It's the person sitting in your chair. It's the person that sat in that chair before you. It's the person that committed to put our children first. And there have been many attacks on our program. They've come in different ways. Reagan went and got $200 million, which was 1/3 of the whole program in 1981, and just eliminated it. I can tell you sequestration is an even more devastating attack on our program, because whether it was intended or not, the effect will be much greater, because people have now accepted that sequestration has happened. What they don't realize or don't internalize is it's going to happen for 9 more years. We've paid the first year price, but we have 9 more years to pay. And by the time that is done, the program will have eroded to a very insignificant amount of money, which makes it even easier to attack. And the problem with that is sometimes we think, I'm not going to be as impacted about that because I'm a high lot, or I get a lot of money, so I'll still survive. You won't survive without the basic support that we all represent. Those on the top are only as good as the foundation that we have when we're all together. And so I guess what I would share with you that all of us have said, and each one of us believes, it's not just the leadership. Leaders are great, and leaders provide direction, but you don't lead if people don't follow. We need people to follow, and we need them to follow you, not just people that have positions and titles. We need for you to be the message carrier. We need for you to be the leader. And I can tell you this organization has always provided and always produced people who are willing to step up and do that. And I truly believe it's because we use that one mantra that is so important. We accomplish the most when we care the least. Who gets the credit? If we want to get done for our children what needs to be done, then it isn't about whether we got exactly what we wanted or what we wanted someone else to have, but that we fought as hard as we could for the benefit of the children we represent, because that's why we're here. We represent them. And so I would just say to you that while there's 4 decades sitting here, there's 25 years of leadership in that chair, the most important people in the room are sitting in your chair. And it is critical that that doesn't change. And it's critical that whoever we pass our chair to, or whoever we bring along with us, understand that lesson. And I think when we heard that we don't want to see superintendents and we don't want to see staffers or school board members, we want to see congressmen, that was the same thing we're saying to you. We don't want to see the politicos out there. What we want to see is the people that truly have shown through their passion and compassion they care about our children enough to come and make the kind of commitment each one of you has made. So yes, you're entitled to a great deal of thanks, more than we could ever express. But you've got a great deal of responsibility that comes with that to keep this moving in the direction it's gone. Impact Aid is the most fragile education program that exists because we have a limited base of people that it impacts. And if they ever de-emphasize our base, then we will be de-emphasized as a program. We will always have plenty of poor kids that they can rally around. But we have a base of students that sometimes gets overlooked because they may not fall in one category or the other. So please remember, it's not about getting credit, it's about getting the job done.
Thank you, Barry. One final thing, because I want to kind of wrap this up, or the time is important, and that is the last few videos you saw were the ones at Lou Dobbs and then the one with ABC News Tonight at Coronado and Virginia Beach, San Diego. That was an example of what we were able to do as we began to have more of a relationship with the media. Up to that time, we pretty much did everything ourselves to a large extent. But when Bush put forward that proposal to eliminate all the Bs in his 2003 budget, we went in full gear in terms of trying to address the media. We've done that once again. We'll talk more about that later on. But the thing that I always remember about that, you remember in that video you saw Bill Hanson. Bill Hanson was the Deputy Secretary of Education. And he's the one that was quoted in there about the fact that every president since Johnson has tried to eliminate the program. We have monies in other areas where we feel will more than fill the void by eliminating the B program, et cetera, and so on. And of course, we responded by all the different media outlets besides editorials in the Seattle Times and other newspapers. We were able to stop it in its tracks, not to mention the fact the coalition came to our aid. Well, the following year, this is a story I always find kind of humorous. The following year, when they were putting together the 2004-05 budget, the Committee for Education Funding, which we're involved in, Joslin's on their executive board. I was a president back in 1995. And in any case, they had a forum, they had a meeting as the 2000, I think it was 4 budget was being proposed over at one of the I don't know, it was over at NEA. I'm not sure where it was at the time. But in any case, I was there sitting in one of my little chairs somewhere along the line, and Bill Hansen came over. And Bill Hansen was talking on behalf of the department in terms of what their budget was going to be upcoming. And we hadn't actually seen it yet. It was early in late January, I think after the President's State of the Union. I don't recall exactly the time, but the budget hadn't come out yet for that year. And I saw Hansen come in the room, and of course my antennas went up right away, and so I got to talk to him. I got to find out what they are doing in this budget after what happened last year. And so he got finished with his remarks, and he started to walk out. Well, I got up and walked out and cornered him in the hallway. I said, Mr. Hansen, no disrespect. He knew who I was and said, don't say another word. We got your message. You're okay. And that's all he had to say. The bottom line was that we were able to make enough of noise in the media that they recognized this was not a popular thing to do, especially during that time. We always use, the thing I've always said, we always use the locomotive that'll pull the train. And all during this time period that we're in the last 15 years, we basically, the military quality of life has been the major issue. You know, if you think about it for a minute, many of those kids that are in schools, especially in military settings, especially the kids maybe even in middle school, they've never seen a time where their parents were not at war. You know, if you think about that for a minute. And so the quality of life issues have been, we played on over and over again, not to mention the fact that, not mention the fact that treaties and the federal properties all are important, but you always ride the locomotive that'll pull the train. I've always believed that. Abner used Douglas, but he also used the Indian lands in South Dakota when he made his pitch in the 80s. So we're always going to make that pitch, okay? But again, I want to ask anybody up here if you got any last comment or two you might want to make to the folks, but I think you get the idea. I mean, when I thought about this, the whole idea was I wanted you to understand what this program has had to do to endure. And I think, as Tom said, the one for all for one has been is a theme that we could really play on. Because without you, this program would not be here. And it just simply would not be here. But with that, I'll let a couple final comments.
One cynical comment now that I don't live here anymore. No one said the word money. This is a town that runs on money. So much what happens up there depends on the powerful and the wealthy doing certain things. Unless things have changed, John, Impact Aid, the subscriptions, Dave, remember we used to get them, $2 and $20 and that kind of stuff. This organization, that's not the currency. The currency that keeps the kids in school are you folks. The office is thin, the fight's big, and it's up against other forces in this town with millions of dollars and huge stakes. And the only currency is the people and the things we've talked about.
Well, I hope that those of you who have relatively new or even old folks, but I only say old folks going back about 10 or 15 years, I do hope that this has communicated to you the theme that I wanted it to do, to communicate, that being that we all have to work together to make this program what it is and keep it alive, because that's what's happened over the last 40 years plus, really. Because if we'd all go away, if for some reason we just push a button and you'd all be gone, nobody be here, nobody would come in the spring, the Impact Aid would not be here. There's no question about it. This program is only here because you have come time after time. And as I'll say a little bit later on, 15 years from now, maybe somebody that's young will still be around. I certainly won't be here. But 15 years from now, I hope there's another session like this, and they'll look back and they'll say, in 2013-14, we faced one of the biggest challenges the program ever faced, maybe more so than even that 1988 debacle over reauthorization. But you know something? We did X, Y, and Z, and we survived, and we're stronger than ever. Let's just hope that that's what comes out of this. Hopefully you've been able to pick up some ideas from what they've done and what they've done in the past. And one more time, thank you so very much for taking time to come up and share this with us. Let's give them a big impact.